Erkang, thank you very much for joining me on the Security Space podcast today. What we will be discussing is how context is key, why asset visibility is the foundation of modern cybersecurity. So, bit of a wordy title, but that will all become clear once Erkang explains a little bit about his story and about the problem that JupiterOne solves. But before we get into that, Erkang, are you okay just to let the audience know a little bit about your story up to today?
Sure. Nick, it's great to be here today, and thank you for having me on your podcast. So as you said, right, so context is key, and that's the foundation of how I started JupiterOne. So to tell you a little bit of the full story, I have been a technologist and a cybersecurity practitioner for pretty much my whole career, right? I started off in computer science, and where I got my master's from NC State, and during that time, I've done a research in network security, anomaly detection, that is, right? So, and I guess that now thinking back, a lot of that almost rooted back to, 25 years ago when I was doing the research, and to figuring out network anomaly, it really is to uncover context in the traffic of that goes through the wire, right? So, and then over time, I was at different organizations, Cisco, IBM, Fidelity, right? So I took different roles, and some of those are engineering focused, and some of those were very much cybersecurity focused, right? So I ran several global practices at IBM, anywhere from pen testing to data security to incident response to compliance and so on and so forth. And then I led the software security and cloud security practice for Fidelity. And then after Fidelity, I joined a startup called Lifomic, where I was the CISO. And all of that time, right? So I've always been a builder as much as I was a practitioner and engineer, right? So, I felt like that, even though that I've transition into more leadership roles in security or in business, I still struggle with asking questions and getting the right answers back quickly from my team or from myself. And, one of the things I've always done in my journey, in my career is, can I automate myself out of the job every 2, 3, 4 years, right? So, whether I'm a consultant, right? Can I build tools to automate generation of the template? And can I build solutions to automate the assessment, right? Or I'm the practice leader or the CISO in organizations, can I automate myself out of that role, right? Can I use automation and data to answer questions that I have to report to the board or to leadership and executives and so on and so forth, or my peers? Can I use that to drive and inform my decisions for the program and so on and so forth, right? And that's what started JupiterOne. And I felt like the answer, for the most part, 80, 90% of the time, is in the data that we already have. And the key of getting accurate answer from the data, right? There's multiple aspects of it. Of course, you have to collect the data, aggregate it, and query it, and so on and so forth, right? But one of the keys is that we have to be able to derive insight from the contextual aspect of that data, right? So, for example, right? So Nick, if you and I are getting to know each other, and you would tell me about yourself and so on and so forth, right? And not just knowing your name and your podcast host, right? But the details about your podcast, what industry is that for? Who's your audience? And who are your speakers and so on and so forth? What topics, what theme, what's your passion? And all those are context, right? About you and your organization, your business, your podcast, right? So all of those things is relevant in answering all of those questions. Very similarly in organizations, right? Whether that is for cybersecurity use case or not,
Mm,
to provide meaningful answers to questions, we have to
mm.
get to the context of it.
Yeah,
And so that's the foundation of JupiterOne. We can talk more
perfect.
about it. Yeah, but that's the long story.
Yes.
Yeah,
No, and thank you very much for that, Erkang. And this specific sector it really excites me at this moment in time, because I finally feel like products like JupiterOne are starting to fight the good fight about bringing security into the mainstream, shall we say, and it's actually giving CISOs more of a voice in the board meetings where you're not just having to like constantly CISOs and security professionals are like they have to fight against the board in terms of like, yes, security, it doesn't provide an ROI, but let me just kind of bring in a product like JupiterOne and say like, look, let's have a
yeah,
look at our assets and let's not be so blindsided and say like, yeah, it's not a sales product, but how can we assess our posture in line with what we spend on security so that we're actually sort of tightening up our posture in line with the
that's right.
market. So it's a really, really cool product. I really like it. And I think it's come at a time where the market needs it because there's much with the evolution of AI, which we'll get into later in the chat.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
feel like we
yeah,
need products like this.
yeah,
So really interesting. So just to kind of move it forward then, how do how does asset visibility actually help organizations move from more of a reactive measure, what we've been, to a
yeah.
more proactive sort of VM?
Yeah, you tee this up perfectly, right? So the reactive versus proactive, right? So I think that I want to keep things simple, right? So there's of course a lot of complexity into security as a discipline, as a capability, right? But let's just keep things simple for a minute. By and large, what is the security function doing? The security function is here to provide assurance, right? To provide assurance that you know things that are of value to the business are protected, right? And things that are of value, right? Let's just think about that, right? Things that are of value are protected. What things? Well, then that goes to the importance of asset management, right? So you can't protect what you don't know, right? And well, people say you can protect what you can see, great, right? But I would emphasize you can protect what you don't know because again, that has the element of context and understanding, not just seeing what you have, but understanding
Mm,
the importance of the different things that you have, right? So again, to keep this simple, you first have to know all of the things
mm,
and all the things that are of business value in the organization, right? And then let's talk about the two sides of the coin, the proactive versus reactive, right? And I think security as a discipline and capability, we've done a really good job over time, have matured in the detection response, the reactive space, and the incident analysis, the event management, the correlation. And think about it, that's also to understand context from events, from what happened, right? But you can't really predict or understand your current state and your hygiene and so on and so forth easily from just logs of what
mm,
happened because things that hasn't happened yet is not in the logs, right? So what we need is sort of the equivalent of that contextual analysis proactively to understand the hygiene, the posture, the current state, the what could happen.
mm,
Now, by the way, these two things also go hand in hand. What happened, and in order to respond to it quickly and meaningfully, you also need to have the context of the state, the structure, right? Like, hey, if you have a burglar that just broke in your house and kicked the door down, okay, so what is that house valuable? If you own 100 houses, how valuable is that house? And if that door is to the main entrance of the house that leads into a room where you have a bunch of cash and jewelry, that's one thing. If that door is a shed in the backyard that has just a bunch of tools that's rusted and left alone, nobody cares, that's a whole different context, right? So even in the incident, in the event of a reactive situation, you still need that proactive posture type of context, right? Not to mention before the event, before the incident, you want to understand that while you have a vulnerability, that your lock is weak on the door. But again, the context of knowing what that door leads to, is it leading to the crown jewel, or is it leading to something that is of lesser value? Because, like, let's face it, right? So everybody's so overwhelmed with all the findings, all the events, and everything else.
It's a little bit
Right.
like Schrodinger's cat, isn't it? Like, what is behind the door? And it goes back to the title of this podcast. Context is key, because it that then impacts your decision. So it's it's so important, and it's a testament of the times, again, what we were saying earlier, how in the past security's always been a little bit like see no evil, hear no evil. If I ignore the problem, it'll go away. Well, no, if someone's breaking into your house, you need to know what room are they in. Like, God forbid, like, where's my child in the house? Is my child close to safety? Like, and
Right.
these are all this information, these informational cues, and what should drive a CEO, because a CEO, their house is their business, at the end of the day, and they need to know every nook and cranny, and they need to know what is going on. So what you're saying is, it's absolutely right, in the sense that that context
Yeah.
implies sort of risk prioritization, which then infers how do we respond to this. And that's why cyber asset visibility should come pretty much in number one when you get your budget. It's like, okay, well, let's put that number one. So then that can be like, okay, I need to spend that much on my identity this year. I need to spend that much on my attack surface management, this much on
Exactly.
my threat intelligence, and then this much on my cloud security, because that
Yeah,
this is like the pre-step, isn't it? So
it is.
it shocks me, and I suppose my next question to you, Kang, is why has it took to 2025 for us to have a look at this sort of product seriously, and why has it not been done before?
I think that that's that a lot of time is what frustrates me as well, right?
Mm.
So, on one hand, as a practitioner, on the other hand, as the founder of this business, right? So sometimes it's frustration for me to say that, why aren't people paying more attention to this, right? Why is there no, you know, additional budget for this solution, right? So why are we not putting more engineers and resources into building and maturing this capability within organizations? Now, a lot of all the J1 customers, right, and a lot of the organizations out there are investing in this, which is great, right? It's very rewarding to see that. But I think there needs to be more, right? There needs to be uh, more focus on the basics and more focus on the proactive side of things, the preventative measures, right? So, but I think, why is that? I think it's just that we are overwhelmed with a lot of things, right? So just think about that as an individual, as a person, let's just say, right? That, security is the health of the organization, right? Very much like your own health, right? So if you're constantly under attack, you're in pain, then, yeah, understandably, your first priority is to mitigate that, right? And it's to stop the pain, stop the bleeding first, right? And it's very difficult for someone who is in pain to think about exercising and diet and vitamins and all of those things, right?
Mm.
And even though that we all know that eventually those things help in the long run, or uh, then maybe even things like doing DNA sequencing so that your body better to better understand how to mitigate the illness and the disease that you're facing, right? So a lot of people may not think about that until something bad has happened. But when something bad had happened, that might be too late. Or then your resources and your attention, your time and your money is then mostly allocated to then reactive measures, right? So I think that's the reality that we face. But on the flip side, that I do feel optimistic and positive that there are more attention being paid in the space, right? We all know that regulations and best practices like the CIS and NIST and ISO, right? So they all say asset management is the first one, right? The challenge is that, this is a challenge for organizations as well as a challenge for J1 or for companies building the solution, right? It sounds simple, it sounds straightforward. And a lot of organizations do take a more straightforward approach to it and say, hey, let's just get all the information into one place, in a database, in a spreadsheet, in whatever that feels easy to accomplish. But then they didn't kind of putting a lot of efforts into contextual analysis, maybe machine learning and, relationship building of these assets, right? They just took a more simplistic view to it. It's better than nothing, right? But that's the challenge. For us, the challenge of aggregating all of those things from all sorts of different places, and then every customer is unique and different, and their environment is unique and different, and understanding all of those, build out all of the relationships, and by the way, do it in near real time, and have to get it right almost every single time. It's a very, very challenging problem to solve.
Yep. And it's that segues perfectly to what I wanted to ask you next. And it is a problem-solving tool. And hypothetically speaking, if I am the CEO of a company, and I needed to not just have a look at the sort of like the objective responsibilities in terms of, okay, I need to have a look at my sales team, I need to have a look at my development team, my security team, whatever it might be. I'm guessing often that there is conflicts arrive in the boardroom, i.e. between the CTO and the VP of sales and the CISO as well, because they all have different risks. They all have different things that are going on. Now, the CISO doesn't really have a leg to stand on sometimes. Until a product like J1 comes in, and because now they can start actually bringing operational figures and actual substance to the risk prioritization, as opposed to, oh, this could happen, that could happen if we don't do this. So I feel like whilst it not only acts as like an objective tool, it can actually be used in a subjective manner by resolving conflicts in the boardroom as well. Do you understand my line of thinking there, and how it can actually sort of influence security leadership in the boardroom?
Yeah, I think that's a great thought. And in fact, a lot of our customers and their leadership do use data and reporting coming out of JupiterOne as discussion points and as reporting, right, to leadership and board and so on. And sometimes, not just in the boardroom, but operationally with their peers, right? Okay. So for the CISO and the security team to get alignment and get support from engineering, from IT, for example, right? So they need context, they need data points, and say that, hey, you have a million things happening, and I also have a million things happening in security. I have all these findings, but guess what? I'm just gonna give you the most important ones because they impact not just us in security, it impacts you in engineering, in product. And here's why, right? Given the context. And these are the highest priority, right? And at the same time, yes, then all of those can aggregate up into reporting so that you can have a more meaningful discussion with leadership, with the board, to say that, hey, if we don't do certain things, these are the actual data-driven analysis, the risks that we're facing. And you can have this in a more objective type of conversations.
Absolutely. I was gonna say it kind of has its own emotional intelligence, but I wouldn't go that far. But what I would say, it again links back to what we're saying about context is key, and the fact that these insights then allow a behavior to happen afterwards. So what we're
Right.
saying is that the CISO can be like, okay, I need to go to my CEO to get more budget because if we don't do X, Y, and Z, this is going to happen, and that will then impact our supply chain, which will then impact our sales, and then therefore the VP of sales is going to be very upset with
Sure.
me. So
Yeah.
you're starting to bring in, okay, oh, people's feelings and people's motivations are then impacted by these decisions, and it's like, okay, this isn't just a tool off the high street. This is like an actual benefactory tool that has multifaceted benefits to my company, not
Yeah.
just the surface level. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Makes total sense. Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah. And also if you think about this, right? So if you think about the data that J1 has in this
Mm,
unified platform, and of course, the first and foremost use case is asset visibility or asset understanding the context, right? So then from that point on, then you can have exposure management or vulnerability prioritization as a very specific use case to be very focused, right? You can have continuous controls monitoring, continuous compliance, right? So from a reporting perspective. And then overarching, right, so that you can have a more unified risk management, right? Reporting to the board, the rest of the leadership, right? And then underlying that you have the data to collaborate with your peers and other functions within the business, whether it's IT or engineering or even finance, right? So to build those cases. Now, but that said, then now going back to the underlying data, because we have the aggregation of software-defined infrastructure, right? So that's essentially what it is, right? So all of these assets are software-defined infrastructure, which is not just the tech stuff, right? That also has the people elements, the product that you're building, and so on and so forth. So we actually have a lot of customers and their engineering teams, their IT teams end up using JupiterOne and be a power user and a heavy user of the product and the platform to get answers, not just security answers, right? You can get answers on, hey, what's the region of my application that's deployed into AWS, right? And what are the resources that are unused from a cost management perspective, and so on and so forth, right? And are the application tagged appropriately so that when something happens, the right teams are notified, right? So there's a lot of these kind of operational things for
mm.
product and engineering that can benefit from having visibility and having the context in the assets.
Absolutely, 100%. I know I touched on it a little bit in the introduction, but where do you sort of see asset management evolving in the next 5 or 10 years? Because I have to throw in the dreaded acronym, the AI. How is it going to affect J1? And is there going to be other factors as well affecting asset management in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that, look, generally speaking, AI is affecting every aspect of everyone's life, right? And professionally, personally, and all of those. Then of course, right? So it has significant impact in a very positive way, right? So with asset management and JupiterOne specifically. One of the challenge, I'll be very transparent, right, with JupiterOne is it can be challenging to use, and there's a learning curve, right? Because if you think about the complexity of the data that you have in a large organization, everything from cloud to code to people to data, to applications, right? So all of those things. And once you aggregate those, you have millions of things and then millions of connections and relationships, right? To even figure out how to digest that, or even to figure out what questions to ask. And once you ask that question, what does that result mean? It can be a pretty daunting task. And it requires people that have the expertise, right, to do that, right, to query the data, to understand the data, and so on and so forth, right? So now that with AI, a lot of that becomes a lot simpler, and which is what JupiterOne, our team, is doing and focus on, is then we apply AI on top of this data so that you don't have to be an expert, or you don't have to deeply understand every little detail of that data model to be able to ask the right questions, right? And to be able to analyze the results and to gain insight from the answers of those questions. So that's primarily what AI can achieve for asset management in the future, right? In addition to that, AI can also perform analysis on a regular basis to proactively identify risks and issues from the assets, right? So then what I would say then is the key is then in the data itself, right? So because JupiterOne has the advantage of already being a data platform and having that data already aggregated and unified and having the relationship and context already built, right? So then we have that as an advantage, and users and customers of JupiterOne have that as an advantage. So we are able to take advantage of AI more so than just having access to AI by itself, right? Because that's what makes AI powerful, is the data. So that's the beauty of marrying the two together.
Absolutely, absolutely. Erkang, I wish we had more time because I've thoroughly enjoyed the last 30 minutes. But yeah, this pretty much brings it to the close for today. So I might be knocking on your door for round two in a few months' time. But yes, if anybody has any questions for Erkang or would like to learn more about JupiterOne, I will be sure to put all the links in down below. But Erkang, once again, thank you very much for coming onto the Security Space podcast.
This is great. Thank you, Nick.